Hello and welcome to Coffee Lovers TV. On the show today, I'm going to tell you all about OXO's Barista Brain Grinder. So this is part of OXO's new line, Barista Brain line. You've seen the Barista Brain Brewer, which I'll link below the video. This is the companion sort of grinder. You can see by design that it looks a lot like the brewer. It goes quite well, but this does have a lot of functionality. So first off, some of the basics. I'd call this, so this is a conical burr grinder. That means that there's a cone burr in the center with a cylindrical burr on the outside, and it smushes the grounds in between those two burrs. Burr grinders are the preferred method because they provide more even and more consistent grind size than blade grinders. That's the short of it. There's a wide range of sort of entry-level electric burr grinders. You can get them for as inexpensive as $40 and as much as $200. This is on the higher end. So this is the Barista Brain burr grinder with the integrated scale. So it has a number of extra features to it, hence the higher price tag. This model sells for $200. I believe the lower level model, they have this grinder without the scale, I believe for about $130. So if you want to get this, if you like some of the features here, you think you don't need the scale, but you want a nice grinder, you can get it for $130. Pretty good deal. So this grinder, as with all sort of entry-level electric burr grinders, is good for pretty much all home brewing of coffee, except espresso. Well, except pressurized espresso. If you're doing like a mocha pot on the stove, or you're doing a hand pump espresso machine, something like that, this will be fine. But if you're using a pressurized espresso machine, you're not going to be able to get the grind size fine enough, and you're not going to be able to get as much control over the differences in grind size for espresso with this kind of grinder. So I'm just going to go over the features of this grinder kind of top to bottom, and then I'll do some little bit of grinding and show you how the grind turns out. Give you my opinions after using this grinder for a while now. So at the top here, we have the hopper, and this removable hopper is kind of cool. So it actually, there's a little tab at the back here. You turn this, and you're going to see that when you remove it, it keeps the grinds, and that's because it has this little door here that opens and closes as you put in and remove the hopper. So sometimes that gets jammed with coffee, so it's not entirely consistent, but it pretty much always, like if you have coffee in here, even if it gets jammed, it's gonna pretty much keep the coffee in there. Just be careful when you remove it, because that sometimes can get jammed open with a bean or two. So that's kind of cool if you want to, if you're having an issue or you want to clean something out, or you could theoretically get multiples of these, although I think that's kind of silly. But you'll see, I'll see if I can do this without making a mess. So you'll see here that some of the, obviously the beans got left behind. That's because when the hopper is in there, the door is open. So I have this plugged in, by the way. Really not recommended doing what I'm doing when the grinder's plugged in, but there we go. So removable hopper, pretty cool. And it also has this nice UV tint on it. I always say when you're storing your coffee to never store it in a hopper. Always keep your beans in a airtight, light-tight container, like the Airscape, for example. That's a good option. Even with the UV coating on here, I still think that's probably the case, although I haven't done testing. There are some nice features about this where you may want to keep your coffee in here just for daily consumption. But we'll get to that. So then of course we have the grind selection. This actually, so it says 1 to 15. It actually has a lot more than that. I think it has about 30 settings. Some of these, there are 2 notches between the numbers. Some of them are 1. So kind of try to show that there. So we're on 8 here. 1 to 9, 1, 10, sort of. 1 to 11, 1, 12. Oh, 1, 2, 12. So it's not, it's got a lot more individual settings between the numbers, which is great for having some flexibility in your grind size. I don't know technically what those settings conform to. I could do some I could get a sifter and kind of measure out the differences between them, but for most people, I think that's pretty excessive. My conclusion is that this grinder, as far as grind size, grind setting options, is good enough for pretty much any hand brewing method. I'm going to skip over the button here for a second and talk about this setting. So this is part of one of the grinding modes that you have available. So there are 3 grinding modes. What I have it set on right now, you'll see this little, hopefully, you should see a little espresso sort of icon. That is push and grind until you turn it off. So it's grind as much as you want. To change the modes, you push and hold until you see all three options here. So the second one's a cup, and that's what this is related to. So the idea with the cup setting is that if you set it to cups and then you select, oops, it's not gonna let me do this. And you can select a number, 1, 2, 3, 4. The idea is this will grind 4 cups, like grind coffee for 4 brewed cups. That's kind of the idea. And this setting will let you sort of micro adjust that. So if on the average in the middle and you do 4 cups, you want to brew 4 cups and you grind 4 cups, you find that it's not giving you enough coffee, you can adjust, or if you're getting too much, etc. I'm a little torn on this. I don't like that mode at all. I don't think that it's useful. If you find a way to set it up and you can brew your regular coffee with that, then more power to you. But if you are like doing any kind of ratio brewing, which I recommend everyone do because it's so easy to do, then there's no reason to use that method. And then in that case, you'd use either the first one, which will basically grind like most other grinders. You turn it on, it grinds. You turn it off, it stops. The third mode, which is really cool, and that's why you have an integrated scale, is you can grind a certain amount of grams. So this might be something that you would use if you're always brewing like the same coffee. This is not, to give you an alternate example, not that great of a mode for me because I try a lot of different coffees. I might go an entire week and have a different coffee every single day. And what I do when I brew is I take coffee from the bag or the container or whatever it is I'm using. I measure out exactly what I'm going to brew with that day on the scale. I put it in the grinder, I grind all of that. I don't need to measure anything with the grinder. But if you like a particular coffee, if you brew on a particular coffee all the time, then this can be totally awesome, especially if you pair this with something like the Barista Brain Brewer, which again, the link's below in the video. If you are always brewing the same amount of coffee and the same coffee every day, then you can like just get up in the morning, say, I'm gonna brew 10, well, I'm gonna do 10 grams because I'm gonna actually do it right now. You can say, I'm gonna brew, select your grams. And then bam, you have 10 grams of ground coffee in here. And that's actually the coffee that ends up in here because it's measuring on the scale down here. And I found it to be actually really accurate. So I've compared this against the Akaya and it stands out. Actually, let's grind a little bit more and then I'm gonna talk about the grind size a little bit. So I'm just gonna set it on 8. They have sort of a drip cone here. I think I found that works fine. Like I think it comes out as kind of a medium coarse. And that's what I would use for the Kalita Wave. It's probably what I'd use for the Chemex. I might adjust a little bit from there. If I was doing something else like the V60, I'd want to go finer. But let's grind out another 10 grams. It's not letting me grind because I have it set at 10 grams and there's 10 in there already. So I got to turn this up to 20 to get another 10 grams out. So, okay. Now we got our 20. I've been brewing with this grinder for a while and I like the results I get on the Kalita Wave. I think that it provides a fine grind for an entry-level grinder. The variation is a little bit more perhaps than I would like. It's a little bit hard for me to show on the video here, so I'm just gonna overlay a picture while I talk about this stuff. But you can see that there's actually a pretty sizable variation in grind size, which is a little odd to me. I think that it should probably be less. So I don't know why there are some like much larger chunks in here. With my experience with some of the other grinders, this feels like the kind of result I might get from, I don't know, like an $80 electric burr grinder. But most of you probably won't, like the kind of middle ground is pretty consistent. Yeah, there are some large chunks, but there's like most of this is fairly even. There are also some much finer grinds, so there's a weird large variation in grind size to me, more so than I think there probably should be. That's just my visual assessment. I've brewed with this. I brewed with this on the Kalita Wave, and I really like the result, so I think it makes a really good cup of coffee, and that's really what it comes down to. If you're using an auto brew machine, then this method is perfectly fine. If you're going for some really fine hand brewing, like you're doing the Kalita Wave, the V60 at Chemex, something like that, and you want to have really precise control over elements like grind size, then this might not be a good choice for you just because of the large variation in size that I seem to run into with this. I think that you might appreciate a more consistent grind size, which can be found in other grinders. But I think for most people, this is a good grind. So like I said, I've brewed with this on the Kalita Wave for some time, and I've enjoyed the results that I get from it. Works really well. It's a fantastic pairing with the Barista Brain Brewer. I've used this with the Mocha Master, the Techniform Mocha Master as well. The ability to grind a certain amount of grams is really cool. I really like that feature. It makes for a really good pairing with the brewers. If you want to, like, if you need your mornings to be much simpler and you don't want to worry about getting a scale out and measuring stuff and you just want it built in, then this is a great solution. Before I get into the things that bug me about it, I want to touch on one thing. I think that the loudness of this is probably about the same as other grinders on its same level, like around the $100 mark. Grinders like that. Again, this is a $200 grinder, but a reason for that price is the built-in scale. Their $130 grinder, OXO's, is the same grinder just without the scale. So I'm going in the comparing around the $100 mark. As far as volume goes, I think it's the same sort of loudness level, but I think it's a deeper level of noise. Like, it feels less loud than some comparable grinders, and I think it just has less high pitched loudness and more low pitched loudness. But it's a slightly different sound from the other grinders. I remember when I first started using it, I thought it struck me as much quieter, but after using it for a bunch of time, I think it's just about as loud as the slower motored quality burr grinders, which, by the way, is one of the major separations. As you get into the $80 to $130 mark of grinder level, the speed at which the motor turns is much slower than the cheaper grinders, and that's a really good thing. You want a slower motor because it's going to create less heat, and it's going to also contribute to more consistent grind size. Okay, so two major, two cons that I've found, aside from, you might consider the grind size variation a con. It doesn't concern me that much. I've brewed really good cups of coffee with more grind variation than what this grinder produces. I worked with a hand grinder for a number of years, and it produces a little bit more variation than that. Two cons. So, and the reason I ran the grinder here for a moment, you see there's all this sort of chaff on the outside. This grinder produces seemingly a lot of static. It'll, like, chaff will fly everywhere when I'm grinding with this. So sometimes I'll even hold this up to here just to prevent some of that happening. But it'll also build up in the chamber here. You can see the walls covered with chaff and some grinds. It can be hard to get all of the coffee out of here, I found. So if I want to grind exactly 32 grams of coffee, I have to grind more often to get that into the brewer. And one of the reasons is the chaff. The other reason, which I think is probably the biggest con for this grinder, is that it seems to hold a fair amount of grinds in here. And by that I mean, it seems no matter how much you grind, you're gonna be capturing at least a gram of coffee in the grinder. And then you can do things like, I'm actually gonna remove this to hopefully try to demonstrate this right now. More would come out if I ran this. The problem is I have coffee in here. If I had put only 30 grams of coffee in here and this was empty, I could run this a little bit more and a bit more coffee would come out. But you can see that it's capturing a decent amount of grind. So, and if you watch my cleaning video of this, my cleaning video of this also demonstrates a bit of what gets captured in this particular grinder. And part of the reason for that is I think they just have this weird route that the coffee takes through here, and this kind of extra chamber, which I'm assuming has to do with setting the scale out. Like, they need the scale here The container has to sit out from the grinder. You've got to have all these electronics, so they have to get the coffee from here over to here, and I think that creates this extra route. Okay, so now all that being said, for the average home brewer, I don't think that matters, especially if you're always brewing the same amount of coffee in here and you're brewing every single day. Having a little bit trapped in here isn't gonna matter. If you're using the, brew me 34 grams of coffee button on here, that's not gonna matter as well, because it's just going to brew, it's gonna grind, did I say brew me 34 grams? It's gonna grind you 34 grams into here. You're gonna end up with 34 grams in here. You are gonna have a little bit of ground coffee stuck in there. But again, that being said, I think for the average home brewer, you aren't gonna care. It's not gonna matter. And you won't notice. It's the same with kind of the grind variation. There are a lot of pluses to this. It still does, it does a great job grinding coffee. It has a lot of really nice features. It looks great, and it pairs well with a lot of other brewing equipment. So I think for the average home consumer, this is still a great grinder. If you're a little extra picky, if you like to try a lot of different coffees, you like to experiment, then this might not be the grinder for you, but that's fine. Again, there are other options as well. So that has been the OXO Barista Brain Grinder. If you check out below the video, you'll see links to the Barista Brain Brewer, as well as I did a video cleaning, how to clean your grinder, and I used this grinder to do that, so you can see how to clean this grinder as well. It's all very straightforward. It's a good product. If you have any questions about the OXO Barista Brain Grinder, my experiences with it, please comment below, and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. Thank you so much for watching. Have a great week.